Welcome back to Legal Candy, where we will be delving into the high-profile legal battles that are shaping our society day by day. I'm attorney Candace Ross Colucci from the Colucci Law Group, and I am your host here today, and I've also got our co-host, MK.
Hello.
Our content writer producer gets us all the good information, and we also have a very, very special guest, once again, who's back, Mr. Luke Lirot.
Thank you.
And so, Luke, if you guys don't know, I've kind of explained this before. He is near and dear to my heart. Luke is not only my mentor, but a family friend. And he is the very first place I ever worked as an attorney. And before I was an attorney, and really kind of gave me the wings I needed to fly. So I owe so much to this man. Luke is just literally considered a legend in the legal field. He specializes in civil rights and First Amendment rights. I mean, really kind of a whole, like, if you are being treated wrong, like, Luke is the one that you're going to go to. And he's the one who taught me how to fight for people, even in instances you're not even sure what the causes of actions are, because he's the one who taught me to go to the book and be like, listen, this sounds wrong, but we're going to figure out how we can sue and who we can sue for this. So that is absolutely what he is known for. And he has the most interesting cases that he finds himself a part of. And so when we're here today, we're going to be talking about Trump. Everybody is talking about Trump in an unprecedented kind of situation when it comes to him running for president and what has happened before when he was president last time. Now this entire process taking place. We've talked before about the criminal charges and some of the civil. So right now, the most recent thing, unfortunately, was the attempted assassination of President Trump during his last speaking engagement. We are going to get into talking about that. And then we also are going to talk about what people have just really skimmed the surface of talking about is really this whole Supreme Court case based on the potential immunity that a president can have in regards to the acts that they're doing as a president. They can't be found criminally liable for some of those. And so Luke is really going to be our expert when it comes to the law behind that and how it's kind of unraveled and what are those implications as we go forward. What does that look like? So just to kind of give you guys a reminder of some of our disclaimers, or just please reminders that information provided in the podcast today is just for informational purposes only. All opinions expressed by the host and guest are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Legal Candy or any of the podcasts or YouTube that you're listening to it on. And this podcast should not be relied on as legal advice, or that we're also on the radio right now. Listeners should consult an attorney if they have any questions specifically. We are a law firm. Luke has a law firm. The Luke Lirot law firm also. We'll get the information for him, so we're making sure we're letting everybody know. But if you have a question for either of us, please reach out to us. This does not create an attorney-client privilege relationship. So just to remind you guys of that. All right, so let's start by talking about the assassination attempt. So July 13th, days ago, Trump, who is now running for president again, and he is in Butler, Pennsylvania, and he is speaking, and he is like minutes into him speaking when shots rang out. And so I think everybody, like, where were you when you first heard about what was taking place?
I was actually watching the program. I was turning on the news, and they cut right to it. So I think it happened at like 6:12. I start the news at 6:30.
Yep.
And they were still trying to figure out how to broadcast what they had seen.
Yeah.
So there was a big gap, the dead air that everybody hates in any kind of broadcasting scenario. But I look at it, and then I see him, grab his ear and then go down. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. I was really shocked at how it was going to feel for me. So we were actually watching Kingdom of the Apes, the new Apes movie. It's
nice segue.
So good. So good. I'm watching Kingdom of the Apes, and it's my son who was watching the news who texts me and says, of course, this is what he texts me, the president's been shot. President Trump's been shot. That's like what he texts me. And so I look at it, hurry up, we turn on the news, and it was literally seconds after it happened too, they're running it. It was shocking kind of how I felt at the time, because the very first thing we're trying to figure out, is he alive? So you see the blood, I see the blood on his face, and we're like, okay, well, he's obviously moving around. But it was interesting to see how they were going to cover it live like that, because they're just not sure what all they're accidentally showing. So what I realized is that they zoomed in on him and they didn't want to show anything else of the outskirts of the stadium that was behind him, because that was really what they weren't sure what was happening. And so, I mean, I'm on the phone with Mary Catherine, calling everybody. Everyone's trying to figure it out. I was of the opinion when I first saw it too. I was just like, are those, I mean, really those are bullets? I mean, that was our thought too. We were just like, it was just so crazy the way it sounded. Right. And then it was like, I believed if you were going to write a script in a movie, and if this would have been the scene you would have played, people would have been like, oh, that's so really, and it grazes his ear. You wouldn't have believed it. That's what would have happened.
It would have seemed too contrived.
Too contrived. And so I just kept on trying to watch as many. What's crazy about social media now is that you find yourself, this was the first time I think something, because age does play a role in how much you have experienced in life with a situation similar to this. Like we'll talk about the things that maybe you've seen on assassination attempts. But for me, what I think was really impactful this time was that the very first thing that me and Mary Catherine were talking about is we were trying to go to TikTok and Instagram to see people who are posting actual live footage.
Right.
Because if you don't get it now, it's going to be gone. It could easily be gone. Like that's what world we're in right now, where the information is being filtered, that's being given to us. And it took the news like an hour and a half to give any true information, any additional information. Like they were too afraid to say it. They weren't showing any of the other, the videos that were happening. Right. So I'm watching all these side videos of, my favorite guy is the guy who saw the shooter, and he's got the beer in his hand. In the most important interview, I think, that takes place there. Right. He's literally drunk talking about, I saw that shooter. I was telling everybody. I told the police officer here and then here, and I was like, what's that guy doing shimmying on a roof? And he was with a beer in his hand. I mean, making absolute history. Yeah. So what we find out is that the shooter is Thomas Matthew Cooks, 20 years old.
Yeah.
20. A kid. An absolute kid.
Yes. A good student nonetheless.
Yeah.
But no indication of any kind of extreme views in any direction.
Isn't that remarkable? That's
school.
Yeah.
Not a great shot. When we were trying to figure out, I was all night long kept on refreshing the news. I couldn't sleep because I wanted to know who the shooter was, because I felt like that was going to be so indicative of what is the backstory. Because at this point in time, there's conspiracies all over the place, and you would be naive to not believe that anyone and everybody is capable of anything. That's what I think we've learned with our mass kind of connection to social media and what you're seeing, what happens. And so I feel like I was just wanting to know, who is he? What's his background? I couldn't wait to see those things. And so to find out that he's a registered Republican, yet he had donated to Biden and was a part of a couple of groups that may have been more, $15. Yeah. To find everything. Had been a part of a couple maybe liberal groups. And that was it. No social media, they said. He's got no social media. I think they just announced that they may have seen that he had an encrypted overseas account or something like that. But other than that, they don't have a motive for why they think that he would do this. And that we now know that it was an AR-15 rifle, and that he got the weapon from his father.
Right.
And I did think it was interesting, we were talking about either, the things that we were looking at was that either this was, and that's why it could have been anybody on either side. It could have been the other side who was behind it, and they just really chose the wrong person who had a bad shot, which would have been the worst situation. Or it was the other side that made the perfect story. Right? Shoot him just close enough to where now, because I think in that exact moment, people started really going, and I thought quicker than we would have thought, of everyone going, oh, he's won the election now. And that's crazy. To think that was our response.
The automatic response is just astounding.
Yeah, that he's won the election. That picture, when he puts his fist up, I have goosebumps thinking about it, because everybody knew in that moment, you were just like, this will be on people's walls. It will be on murals.
It's tattoos.
It'll be tattoos. That is, and I think I also looked at, I watched it.
Sneakers.
Sneakers.
$299. Yeah, I was fascinated by that.
Yeah, $299 for sneakers. And I think whenever something happens and it's on camera, I like to rewatch it over and over and over again, just to watch everybody's reaction.
Right.
Like to see, what do people do in the moment when something like that happens? And I have watched, because that's probably what is in my feed sometimes. I'm more of a dramatic person when it comes to like in social media. I'm always seeing like kind of morbid things most of the time, or public things that take place, like a shooting and how everyone runs everywhere. I couldn't for the life of me believe that nobody went anywhere. They had to tell them to duck.
Right.
They still didn't evacuate. Everyone was just sitting there.
Stayed right there.
Stayed right there.
Just watched. Yeah, no idea.
And there was no question. I mean, at the very beginning, it was questionable what was taking place.
Right.
But then when Trump, as he's the first person who ducks, Trump ducks after he realizes that he's been hit in the ear. Then no one else they really don't start to duck until the Secret Services is like, what's wrong with you guys? Get down.
What do we do?
Yeah.
What are you supposed to be doing? You guys got to get down, but nobody runs.
Yeah.
People will, in a normal situation, if you're in a mall, if you are at a movie theater, there has been times when they trample each other over like something that sounds like a weapon.
Right.
They go running in every direction, and if somebody starts running, other
Yes.
people starts running, right?
Right.
It's that whole anti-psychological thing. So it was weird to watch no one run. Like I felt like they were all just they came there ready. I think they were just like ready for anything that could potentially take place. I think that their conviction, some people's convictions towards Trump, is unmatched to most presidents that have come before him. I think we're looking at a president where I think there are a lot of people who are ready and willing to die for him, which is unfortunate. You shouldn't think like that. But that's what I felt like when I watched the crowd over and over again. I mean, there was still a shooter, and he stands up and puts his fist up, and they
Right.
all clap and start to stand back
Right.
up.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
and
Astonishing.
remember, the stadium people didn't know the shooter had been taken down.
No.
So the only
How do they
people-
know he's the only shooter?
and how did they know he's the only shooter? So I think it was definitely
Fascinating.
interesting to watch. So what other assassinations have you ever watched on, or attempted assassinations have you watched in your lifetime on?
Well, actually, when I was growing up, I saw Lee Harvey Oswald get shot by Jack Ruby on a small black and white TV, which was fascinating.
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
9 years old at the time, and that stuck with me for a long time. And then as the whole conspiracy issues arose about the Kennedy assassination, that's
Yep.
been fascinating to me forever.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I've always been interested in that.
Yeah.
And then I just, I'm always trying to figure out, is this guy a patsy? That's
Yeah,
the first
for sure.
concept I start to think about
Is
in
he?
any kind of an assassination issue.
Yeah.
And obviously, Mr. Crooks tried to get on the freshman rifle team at
Please,
Bethel High School.
That was when we knew that it couldn't be, that it wasn't
but
purposely
he wasn't
done.
allowed on. But after that, he joined a shooting club, a private shooting
Okay,
club, and apparently
okay.
went out there quite a bit and developed some skills. I mean, obviously, he came millimeters close.
Yeah.
And even from that distance, I mean, I know that a highly trained individual probably would have been more accurate, but the difference from shooting at that distance,
Yeah.
just the slightest centimeters, it's
Yeah.
just, the difference is just astonishing.
It was.
And now everybody thinks that, this is divine intervention and that,
Oh, they went straight to God too. I mean,
Trump's-
everybody was like, he's been
Yeah.
sent. He's now the king. He's
And-
been sent here
yes.
from God.
And despite his personal predilections for things that probably don't fall within the fundamentalist regime, they love him. He's got them in his back pocket as far as the election. And, this is confirmation to them that Trump is God's choice to go forward as our president.
I did think that was interesting on how many people went to a man who I would say doesn't project himself to be very religious
No.
or never stood behind the fact that I'm here on behalf of my divine right to other people than to say God must have God wants this man to
Right.
survive to be our president. I think just goes to the extremist that there's a lot of people feel. But I did see, I saw a really good reenactment of how the bullet misses his head, is that it's because he literally turns his head. I thought it was really great how you really
Right.
could see it, how in that moment when he goes to look at the immigration chart,
Right.
he said, as soon as he says it and he moves a little bit, that's when it goes from, it would have been
Right.
like right in his kind of eye socket to hitting the ear. So I thought that was definitely pretty shocking. But I mean, I was up all night. I was taking notes. I was screenshot. I was afraid I was going to lose all the evidence. I was like,
Yeah.
I was
recorded.
I'm recording every single thing I can find. I'm like saving it, downloading it to my phone because I'm just like, it's crazy we got to that point. But you're right. As you're young and you learn about things that takes place, you learn of the conspiracies. Just like
Yes.
JFK. Like, what is it that really, really, truly happened? Who all knew?
Yeah.
It's interesting to watch. But
Right.
so I was like writing all this stuff down. I'm like, I look like a psychopath to my husband. He's just like, we're all on the phone talking about what we think may have taken place. Because I think one of the biggest issues for people was, and it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback it, right? To go back and go, well, we should have, could have, would have, this is what we should have done, and all of these things. And now everyone's pointing fingers at each other. But the first conspiracy was that how could a shooter if the Secret Service is supposed to go out there and look at the whole entire area, there was only so many building tops. The shooter ends up getting on a building top not far from it, and he's got a great line of sight of Trump. They have shooters, and I guess what I had kind of put together that I thought was interesting was that the Secret Service was saying our zone of security was one area, and the local police were supposed to do the other zone. And so it was like they've already been pointing those fingers as to whose responsibility it was for that area, and why wasn't there somebody, on that area. And then I also thought that, when they were talking about how there were people who saw him and have video of him the shooter climbing on the rooftop, and they said, well, I told a bunch of people, about this man, and they're just like, well, that means it must be a conspiracy. And I'm just like, have you ever been to a rally? It's madness. It's hectic. Everybody, if you're telling an officer, I think this guy looks suspicious, he's probably also heard from other people who go, a guy over there looks suspicious, this guy over here looks suspicious.
Right.
And then I think they've kind of said that maybe that there may be a defense that the police sharpshooters that were on the rooftop, that they may have that they saw him. That's what it looks like. It looks like we see the video of how the sharpshooters react, is that their line of sight looked like they were on him, but I think that they weren't sure who he was. I think that they were not sure if maybe he was the police department or somebody else on the other side who was also just keeping watch. And I think it's because so many things go into play. And yes, he's a former president. He is entitled to Secret Service.
Absolutely.
But I think no matter how much you prepare for these moments, you don't really think that they're going to happen.
No, of course not.
So I really think that it was just, once they unravel it, I don't think it's as much as a conspiracy as it seems, as it's like there's so many things that kind of go into play at all times. I do think the sharpshooters had him into sight, probably weren't really sure, and they're like, I'm either have to be sure and shoot this and blow this kid's head off in the middle of this entire thing.
Right.
But I think by the time they kind of thought about it, he shot first, and that's where you see the sharpshooters move. They back up, and then they have to get their sight back together, and then that's when they shoot. That's what it kind of looked like to me.
All accurate.
Yeah.
They got Crook's phone, and apparently he had all kinds of different imagery and things he was looking at, including the Democratic convention. And Biden and things like that. So it doesn't look like he was focused. I mean, it's just hard. It's hard to really pinpoint that.
Yeah.
Really tough. It's going to be really tough to unravel that.
To do it, yeah. And I think Mary Catherine was saying, if you did the math, Trump was president when he was like 12 or something like that.
He was 12.
Yeah.
12 years old.
He doesn't even know.
So it would, maybe.
And not to interrupt you, but the other theories that I always look at, and I think when you look at the, West Virginia shooting, 40 people killed and all of that stuff, and we've reviewed that. I work with the Association of Club Executives, and there's a gentleman named Mike Acello that puts on programs so that if you're in a place of public assembly, it teaches you how to deal with an active shooter situation, and it goes through all of these different historical events like the West Virginia and the Pulse in Orlando and things
shooting.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
And basically just lots of different decisions people could have made that would have saved 20, 30, 40 people if you act in the way that they train you. So I participated in a couple of those programs. But again, we've gotten to the point in our society where do we have to be that vigilant all the time of an active shooter coming out of virtually any social setting and be able to respond appropriately? And for the most part, even these guys, they were caught off guard. They were surprised.
Yeah.
Probably because of the number of different events that Trump's been appearing at. And here's this one, and that's a situation that rises here, but not any of the others. So they sort of get lulled into this sense of security.
Yeah. And not always just being on that, on your toes of that alert. I mean, right after the shooting, I was just thinking, there's nowhere that you can say that you're just safe, and I think I felt this way after the movie theater shooting. I think that was pretty remarkable, and I was like, a movie theater, and now we have a grocery store shooting. So the very first thing I said, I was like telling my staff, I'm like, listen, we have got to start going to the shooting range. I'm like, I've got a weapon, but I need to be more confident because now I'm at the point where my fear is to be in a situation where I can't protect myself and people that I love, and my only option is to run. That's what I'm afraid of at this point in time, is that my only option would be to hide or to run. And it's like, I don't envision that being the way that I'd want to go out, and it's like, and I don't plan on doing hand-to-hand combat with them. So, but it is absolutely unfortunate. I was definitely trying to pay attention during this time of the other people that were hurt, during the shooting, especially the man, I had watched it over and over again, that is Corey Comparatero, and that is the devoted family man, former fire chief of Buffalo Township, who was shot in the head. And that was some of the very first footage that I saw on TikTok from people who had zoomed in on it and were watching it in the background. And that was remarkable too, because he gets shot really early on with no one noticing besides like his wife.
Right.
You know, everybody standing
they're
around.
sitting there as if nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah, he goes straight down. You have him down, and then on the other side, you've got two other people that are down, but you still have the crowd like completely oblivious to that fact. He was shot in the head, and there was an amazing, like, it's always interesting to see who all comes out of the woodwork or who's all around there, but there was an emergency physician that was there, and he tried to revive him, and they quickly pulled when they brought him down, it looked like the scenes from war. That's what it looked like.
Right.
I mean, the way they carried him out of there.
Dragging him out of there.
Dragging him out of there by his arms and legs. And threw a towel over his head. It just broke my heart because I don't know why, but for some reason I just felt like that to me was, before I even knew that he was a police chief, I was just like, that man needs to be honored considering he took a bullet that was intended for somebody else to impede our democracy and all of that kind of stuff. And I was just like, my heart just went out to him because it's just so, it should never get to that level, especially when you're just trying to support somebody else that you think is running. It ends in your death.
And, you know, politics has never been a big issue for me. I've always considered whoever's running to be somewhat tainted. I just don't have a lot of confidence in any party or any candidate.
Yeah.
But what I thought distinguished us from other countries were that regardless of how heated the controversy may be, no matter how motivated the disagreements may be, unlike third world countries where they kill people left and right in the political arena, we would at least let that decision be made at the ballot box. And I think that's what pretty much everybody responded to.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's always those outlandish people, you know, the ones that you can never predict what happens. And the one characteristic that I thought, and what I was going to talk about a little bit before, was that a lot of these individuals that resort to these killings are bullied.
Oh gosh,
most of them are treated like,
when you saw the picture, if you had to draw who, if I told you he was 20 years old, and he shot up an area, and I asked you to draw it on a piece of paper, people could have drawn that without ever seeing his face. They could have known, because that kid, you could tell, had been bullied. It's the profile. Yeah.
You know, and is that, you know, a lot of times that's the motivating factor. That's people wanting to get vengeance against the universe that's been so adverse to them as they've had try to struggle through life. So, and
isn't that what I think is so disappointing about that, is that the very first thing that people go to is gun control, gun control, gun control. And I'm just like, guys, listen, there's no way you're going to be able to get rid of the guns. It's not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
Not here.
So instead of just always going straight to that, another area that you could go through is exactly what we're saying. We've been able to tie so many of these shootings to the way they have been treated in their life.
Right.
So if we really wanted to be proactive and figure out how can we potentially minimize this kind of things, it would be the idea of how do we seriously get control of the bullying aspect. And we are now in a time which was interesting, because I feel like the way that the arc of bullying has gone was people were bullied, and then all of a sudden, because I was really interested in it when years ago I was interested in child suicide. That was insane. That whole entire concept. I did a lot of research. I wanted to be a part of an independent film that was based on the concept that when we were young, we were always told, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Remember? And then all of a sudden, I think what changed that concept for a lot of people was the first time a 8-year-old committed suicide. And then what happened is when one committed suicide, it opened up the door to where we had a string of children's suicides. And that was kind of where I thought the world needed to open their eyes and go, listen, actually, these words are just as harmful, if not worse, because the physical will heal a lot more before the mental does.
Right.
And so then we became a society that seemed to be more aware of bullying, right? Then we had laws that came into effect where anti-bullying laws, schools all jumped on board, and they were doing presentations, and it became an actual crime to bully someone, and most people didn't even know that. So we were like in this arc where it was like we were looking at bullying differently, and then all of a sudden social media came, and now we've went times a million. Now it's You can say whatever you want to somebody. It's not being filtered out. It's with such vengeance that they're doing it. They're making up false profiles. So it is interesting that there is so much to be tied to the bullying factor, to where when we point fingers and go, it's because of the gun. It's because the parent who had a gun, who didn't lock it up, and all of those things, right? Instead of going, could it have been us? Was it society? Did we create this person?
Right.
Or was he born this way? You know? And I love how people are coming out of, who went to school with him, and were like, he was real quiet. And I was like, really? I think if we did a true investigation, who made fun of him?
Yeah.
What'd they say? Do you know what I mean? Like, because those things are directly correlated to why he probably would have done something like this, which is so upsetting.
The whole development of social media now, one kid making fun of person in their class, you know, you got 8 or 9 or 10 people that see it. That's going to be very, very depressing to the person who's the recipient of that kind of abuse. Now it gets on social media, and it's so broadly publicized that these poor folks think there's no way I'm ever going to be able to regain my reputation.
Yeah.
And, you know, that motivates them to kill themselves, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Just terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
No, it is. So, and then also we had 2 other injured individuals, I guess, that were more seriously injured, is David Dutch and James Copperhaven. And so our hearts go out to those people and the families of them. And we've got prayers out for them, because I know they're still in the hospital receiving medical treatment while this investigation is still underway. And it'll be interesting to see what they're able to determine. How many shots really was it? I mean, we've heard 7, 8, 9. Whose shots were they? Because we have sharpshooters. At any point in time, did any of the military that was on the ground, did any of the Secret Service on the ground actually shoot their weapons at any point in time? Or is every single bullet that came this way all from him, and there was only 2 going back? Like, I'm interested to see those reenactment to things, to think about where we'll be 6 months from now on what we know really that kind of taken place, and who's going to take responsibility.
I think that they always look for scapegoats. And I think the head of the Secret Service is no longer going to be the head of the Secret Service for long. I think that they're going to try to find her and isolate her as a scapegoat, because even though their explanation about the perimeter that they were responsible for, it was so small. And anybody familiar with what you have to do to protect anybody, even the Pope Mobile, for heaven's sake, when the Pope goes on a trip, they make sure that there are no places where somebody can fire from a rooftop. They've got people on all the rooftops throughout the entire route. And here we got this guy climbing up, and it's supposed to be the local cops. The sheriff said, basically, we don't have enough resources to have covered that to the extent necessary. Well, did you tell that to the Secret Service?
Yeah.
Well, they knew. Well, I don't know where the breakdown of communication was there, but the bottom line is the Secret Service is the ones that are ultimately responsible for the protection of this presidential candidate. And, you know, the conspiracy theories I hear is that, well, you know, they're paid by the federal government, Biden's head of the federal government, maybe they didn't give him enough protection that he deserved or that he wanted or asked for. And they're, you know, the first response they had was, we gave him more than what he asked for, because they're trying to avoid any kind of blame for that. But it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. But somebody is going to take a hit for this. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
No, and I think it's interesting now, they're literally slowly, piece by piece, trying to identify every person that was in that crowd, in that stadium behind him. And we've been watching their reactions and how they have reacted. And one of the women we just found this morning, one of the women who was probably the most unfazed by the entire thing, she was wearing a white tank top, watched her over and over again. Shooting happens, she barely gets down. Then she takes her phone out, and then she's finally told to duck, and she starts to slowly sink down while she's still with the camera. And they just identified her as, she's allegedly an FBI agent.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was so crazy, and didn't do anything. And then I found there was a Secret Service who was back in the back, who I saw that video where he tells, before the shooting happens, he tells like 3 people to get down in that back row right behind him on the ground, not in the stadium, but in the ground. He tells 3 people to get down, but you don't know if he's just saying, hey, get down, like you're in the way or something, but he's like, get down. Then when the shooting happens, he cowers and gets down.
No,
he gets down himself. Like, you don't know how people are going to react. Yeah, you don't.
I'm like, what are they doing?
You
Right.
really don't know until they're in that exact moment. And I think also, the sharpshooters that were police officers, the difference, I think, being a sharpshooter for a police department and being a sharpshooter for the military, I think that there's potentially maybe a different level of, I think, not necessarily always experience, but the level you're willing to just sacrifice your life for at that exact moment. I think that
Right.
the military is more intense. They're always ready, and I think the police departments are more like, listen, we're going to be a little more cautious about this. I think military does a lot of shooting first and asking questions later when they're in the middle of it, and I think police does their suit all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
the police department's definitely asking a lot of questions in their head before they pull a trigger. Most of the
right.
time, and so I think that plays
Right.
a role in it too.
Well, before the show, we were talking about one of the rumors circulating was that the sniper that took out this assassin didn't wait for approval and just went ahead and shot and was terminated for that. He was fired because he didn't wait for the final approval of taking that shot. And I thought, that's just ridiculous. That's
Crazy.
amazing. I don't know that that's true. We've been talking
Yeah.
about trying to verify
Yeah.
that.
Allegedly,
But that
told
seems to be a
stand
rumor
down
that's circulating. I'm
and
thinking that, they can't
Like
do
during
that.
the shooting, like during this whole entire
Right,
told
waiting-
him in his
waiting
sight,
for the
he
clearance
told
to take the
stand
shot,
down, and he
you know?
took the shot.
man,
That would be amazing. That,
it's going to be.
I would
interesting
take
here.
his case.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For
I know,
wrongful
right?
termination,
Wrongful
right?
termination.
Yeah.
All the potential
exigencies of
lawsuits
the moment. There's going to be a lot.
that
There's
are
gonna be a lot.
there. And just side note is that when we're talking about the legal side of some of these things, is like, once again, is there liability on the facility? I mean, I guess they were out in a field, but is there a liability
Right.
on where they were at, on who put the actual rally on, their lack of security at that point
Right.
in time?
Of course.
Yeah.
I think, obviously when you're dealing with either the federal government or the local law enforcement agencies, they have different levels of immunity that attach to them. But based on all the evidence that you and I have seen, there's a clear, just a pathway to negligence. Somebody didn't do their job properly,
Yeah.
and people were either killed or injured by that.
Yeah.
So let's see where that goes.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And then I think the other unfortunate thing that we see sometimes is when the shooter ends up being deceased in a situation like this, there's always, like we're talking about, scapegoats, and then sometimes there is a societal need for someone to be prosecuted, for someone to be held responsible. And so one of the other questions is, do you think that they'll turn to his parents, and to see what they knew or didn't know, and how he got his hands on those weapons and all
Right.
those kind of things? Because we've just seen our first or second cases of the criminal prosecution of a parent who they said were negligence
Right.
in the way that they didn't
Oh, yes.
notify
New law
anybody
there,
of their
yes.
child. Yeah. And so we're really seeing kind of movement into that. And the sad part is I don't know how much I would feel that it's 100% just, because I think it's such a hard, as anybody who's been a parent knows what a hard line it is to know when your child is having a rough time in life and school, especially if they're being bullied. When they say things to you like, I just wish I could end it all, or I just wish that I could, hurt him, or, all
Right.
those other things when they're frustrated and anger, to know when the line becomes that I should be calling the police on my 10-year-old, or I should be calling the police on my 21-year-old, because they're having a frustrated moment or something like that. So I think it's sad.
His parents were therapists.
That's what I think is in madness. Yeah.
So that would be a higher duty
Burden.
for
Yeah.
them, because their professional responsibility would be to evaluate people to find out what their needs are for the therapy that they need to get well accustomed to the challenges of life.
And they would be mandatory reporters.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
even a higher standard. So when
Right.
a regular parent would have no liability to say, if my child came to me and said that he wanted to hurt somebody else, I don't have a responsibility
Right.
to say anything to anybody. But if I
Yes.
happen to be a therapist and they tell that to me, or a teacher,
Different.
then I have a mandatory responsibility to report it. So it will be issues. It's so interesting that you brought that up. I bet you that would be one of their biggest segues into it.
Yes.
Is that if anyone would have known, it would have been you, which is so hard. I even hate even saying it. I'm just saying what I think a prosecution may say, because people want blood, right? They want some type of consequences to when something horrific happens. And just saying, hey, this is one of those coincidences where a couple people made small mistakes and they all came together in a big way that produced this is not enough for the public a lot of times. So it will be interesting. So we'll keep everybody informed with all that. And then now we'll talk about this immunity. So we've
Right.
done a little. And it's funny when we first started talking about Trump is we were just like, well, we should talk about this criminal case and this one. And then finally put him on a list and we were just like, you will need a massive whiteboard. I don't even know what his legal team must be doing besides going, they have a whole
Right.
just wall of whiteboards going, here are all the cases. You're being charged civilly here, criminally here.
Right.
And they're just kind of all over the place because I thought it was interesting when you talked about the democracy and how we are supposed to be different than other countries and the idea that we should really be allowing the people to vote and nothing should stand in that way of that right. And what we did, what I don't think I ever really thought about was that you can give people the appearance of democracy and
Right.
go, hey, you're going to be able to vote, but we're going to choose who the people are that you're voting
Right.
for.
Right.
And I felt like some of this stuff is very much in that way of how can we prevent this man from being able to run? Because I've never seen so much, as you've seen it in your history.
Right.
Have you ever seen so much litigation aimed at one candidate?
No. In fact, when you talk about that and you say there's no such thing as bad ink, any publication
Yeah.
of your name, people are going to hear it, going to bring it to mind, and whatever their original sentiment is, that's going to be encouraged to continue. So regardless of what they do to him, the people that like him and have
Yeah.
always liked him and love him, and as you had said, would even die for him,
Yeah.
they're not going to change their mind. All this does is accentuate their desire to be even more aligned with him. So you got the Stormy Daniels trial in New York, and the 34 counts that they file for every link of the chain along the way.
Yep.
Then you've got the immunity decision, and then you've got this assassination attempt at this rally. So it never ends.
Yeah, it's not.
It never ends. And poor Biden can't get up and down the stairs to the plane.
I
So
know.
it's so dramatically different. It
And
really
it
is.
feels like, and I think what was really upsetting about it is that I didn't realize how distracting it really truly is. It's like, I remember back in the day, it was like when someone was running for president, I've said this before I've said, when someone was running for president, you would have like a 2-month span before the election where there was kind of a difference between the public and you would be kind of in maybe a little just disagreement with a friend over it. Maybe
Right.
it was very slight, right? And then the minute that the results came out, I felt like the haze would go away. It's like you don't even remember who was running against that person, and that becomes your president.
Right.
And I think it was Trump ended up being the very first time he ran, we saw such a stark difference between opinion. And then now with what's taking place, I'm thinking, what does our government do? Is this what our government does the entire
Right.
time? With
Right.
all of the resources that's being spent on all the different court cases all over and all the different stuff, it's such a distraction from the fact of at any point in time are we going to focus back on our country
Right.
of what's happening?
Right.
Every
One
time
would
we turn
hope.
around, between trying to
So,
impeach him, I mean,
right.
it's like when you think about it, I do think that we are sitting in the time of when the fear for a lot of people was initially that Trump would become president. But I do think that a big fear for a lot of people was the power that he would have.
Right.
And I honestly believe he will go down in history as the most infamous president of all time at this point. I mean, I think when he finished his first term, I don't think anyone had that much to write home about. I don't think it was like people were gonna,
No.
I always think about what is the history book gonna look like?
Right.
Is he gonna have, when they go through each president, is he gonna have one page? Like
Right.
all the other presidents? Because then when you got to JFK, you have more pages because
Right.
of what happened. How would you ever
Started as
fit the
host of
history
Apprentice.
Yeah.
of Trump? It's
And I think obviously Trump's presidency was punctuated in a big way by COVID.
yeah.
So, who knows what would have happened differently had we not been dealing with all that along the way. And
Oh, you're right.
His infamous advice to take a shot of bleach and that'll wipe it right out.
Yeah.
And I think that the experts are over there on the side going, what did he just say?
They lost their mind.
Oh my God, what's he suggesting? So, I don't know. I mean, I'm concerned. I don't think there's any question that he's going to win. There's no
yeah.
doubt in my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
I don't care who the Democrats pick. And as I said before, Biden, I've got respect for his accomplishments, but his playing days are over.
Yeah.
And he's being selfish, not committed, not
Yeah.
in some way, I need to finish this job. You're not capable of finishing the job, and you don't have the mental aptitude right now to be the leader of the free world.
Yeah.
As much as I love you and I respect everything you did for this country along the way,
Yeah.
give it up. Don't be so selfish and so egotistical about trying to continue this. Again, that's not critical. That's just the way it is. I mean, none of us last forever.
Fact. Do you think, when I look at Biden, because I remember Biden back in the day, because I especially when he was first running, I watched a lot of his old stuff, and very articulated, very smart, very quick-witted, and so I'm wondering, and then very committed to the cause is Biden has been a lifer politician. So it's
Yes.
like that's a society of which you don't understand unless you're in it, where it is a club of which you are part of something bigger than yourself. So I always think sometimes when I'm looking at him, do we think that it's not so much him as it may be the whole party who's saying, listen, we don't have any other option right now
Right.
that we believe could take on Trump. We believe you're the strongest one to take on Trump, even at your weakest point.
Right.
Physically or mentally or whatever it is, we still think you're our best shot against Trump, to where they're kind of saying to him, I wish I could just know what's going on in the background. Is it
Right.
him or is it them? Is it them saying you can't drop out? Or are they telling him right now, you need to drop out, and he's going, no way, I'm not going to? Because to me, he looks really tired. Like very tired.
Yes.
And very like when he walks on and off the stage,
Yep.
I look at him like a grandpa, and I'm just like, if he was my grandpa, I'd be like, okay, that's enough. Sit down,
Right.
Go home. Like you need to relax and just
Right.
take some time off and enjoy the
It's the
last
cycle of
years.
life. Yeah. No, but I think a lot of people go, well, he'll do fine, and he'll have a cabinet surrounding him to help him out. But that ultimate decision is his. The immediate decisions have to be made by somebody that's got the aptitude and the ability to think quickly, make the right decision, and especially in emergency situations.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just not comfortable with the mistakes he's made just in the last several public appearances he's
Yeah,
made.
yeah.
And I like the guy. I thought he did a lot of good things that he could have gotten more credit for. I'm not really happy about the immigration issues. I thought that could have been handled differently. But when you think that there were bills being presented that the Republicans were opposing because those would have fixed things just so they could continue to criticize everybody in power. When you get beyond the first level of analysis, you realize that there's a lot of political hanky-panky taking place that really inhibits the ability to make things better,
Yeah.
which should be their primary goal. But, my big concern is Trump really going to be that vindictive to the people that have been...
100. I mean, I think and I would hope
Yeah.
not. What I would hope
Right.
is that he'd realize we have so much work to do, and we haven't been
Right.
doing work for a really long time. That's what I feel like. I feel like
Right.
it started before your presidency, and during your presidency, after your presidency, and I'm just thinking like, I hope we don't spend this entire time making people pay for the way that they behave. And I think that that's also the fear of why they started doubling down.
Yeah.
And I also realized that when we just recently saw how much of a decline Biden has had, and really made me realize Biden has nothing to do with what is taking place with all this stuff against Trump. If you think he's sitting somewhere on a daily basis going, yeah, let's charge him with this and let's charge him with that.
Yeah.
I mean, as an attorneys, we realize as litigating attorneys who've done criminal, civil, like Luke taught me everything. And so we've really done a little bit in every single type of law.
Oh, yeah.
Some of these are so crafty that they really are a team of lawyers sitting there going, let's flip through our book of causes of actions
Right.
to figure out what we can fit within this realm that I don't think Biden is anywhere involved in. So you really realize there is such a huge separation between what the president's powers are and that there is a team of people who are making all of those other decisions around it. And that's what I really saw is when we saw how I'm like, there's no way that man is sitting there going, let's try him here, there, civilly, criminally. It's not at all. I think it's gotten so out of control of whoever the forces that may be that are so afraid of what would happen if Trump is president again that I think that became so like just questioning to people to go, what is it you're trying so hard to stop? Where is the fear from,
Yeah.
And people who are like, well, we refused to leave office. I've heard that concept so many times from people. I'm like,
Right.
what are you talking about? I'm like, that's what you think's part of the fear is that he may not leave, although he's left before. And then it was like, I think when they tried to use, the Capitol, that whole entire thing of like, well, he may incite violence and all of this stuff and rioting and those kind of things. But the level that they went to, I think that they said, listen, we're already in this, and if he wins now, he's coming for all of us. So we better just keep it going.
Right.
I mean, up until the last
to say.
moment.
Yeah.
Did you know, and we talked about this before in our show, didn't you think it was crazy how fast these cases went to trial, some of them?
Well, if you think about them, let's put them in perspective.
Yeah.
So first, he's got the sex abuse trial with the woman in New York that apparently molested in Bergdorf Goodman 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Where does that come from? And then he starts defaming her, and they give out millions and millions of dollars. Then he's got the second case where he purportedly put in fraudulent information on loan applications and inflated the value of things, and they bang him for millions and millions and millions of dollars. Then he's got the Stormy Daniels thing about trying to hide all that and being able to engage in all that activity through Michael Cohen and all of the trickery involved in that. And then, boom, then we've got this whole issue with the immunity. The immunity thing, just to start talking about that, you got to understand that this was all predicated on the Justice Department's belief that what he did related to January 6th was a violation of his obligation under the Constitution to basically participate in the normal and peaceful transition of power.
Okay, so let's walk back through that. So we are talking about the most recent decision by the Florida Supreme Court, which is Trump versus United States, right? I just think that in of itself, it's
that's classic.
Yes, it is. It literally is. Trump versus the United States is a Supreme Court case. And so giving the background, so they are coming at Trump in every direction. They're going, we're going to find you things you did before, during, after, in any type of capacity to figure out what we can do. And I think one of them, if you mapped it all out, you're looking at it going, we were going to stop him any way we could. Financially, physically, emotionally, all those things. Financially, we're going to try to take all of his money, $500 million. At this point, I think he's at $1 billion in fines. And then we're going to try to put him in jail. So he's sitting in jail while the voting's happening. Right. Which, by the way, we talked about this before, what happened in the Stormy Daniels case, and they were supposed to do sentencing July 11th. Right. And both sides actually agreed to continue the sentencing.
Right. Based on this decision.
They wanted to know that this decision that has come out from the Supreme Court, how that would affect his sentencing. Right. But these facts behind this case go all the way back to the November 2020 election. So this was what takes place. Trump has been in office. Right. He runs for re-election against Biden, and he loses. And before he actually leaves office, he starts an investigation and makes all of these accusations that he believes that it was election fraud.
Correct.
So those were the backstories. And then he tries to overturn it. And this is what's interesting about the allegations, that the case in and of itself, this is public record, by the way.
Yes.
One of the biggest cases that we've seen in a really long time. The allegations are that Trump conspired to overturn the election results by spreading knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the collecting, counting, and certifying of the election results. So that is what he had been indicted. So they did a federal grand jury indictment on 4 counts of conduct. And so those 4 counts, I think what we were just chit-chatting about is the 4 counts are conspiracy to defraud the United States. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. Conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, which would be the election, an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. And as you have done federal law for a long time, tell me how low the standard is what I would say, for the word conspiracy.
2 people speak to each other and something bad happens down the road. That's about it.
That's how low the standard is.
Fascinating. And a lot of people will say that this was all the result of a grand jury, so there has to be some credibility that attaches to that. You know as well as I do, that's not always the case. I think the old saying is that a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich if it's presented appropriately, and there's no defense to that. I mean, you don't even have the right to be in the room with your client if he's being questioned by the grand jury. Take a break, come out and talk to you, but you're not in there listening to any of that. So it's a really unique proceeding. And I think that the whole nature of this case from the outset was very lofty. Now, everybody said, well, he'd already lost the election. He was still president. He remains president until January 20th when they swear in the next guy.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, the decision basically said, well, what he said to the public, he has the right to do that.
Yeah.
That certainly falls within the official act. So I think the decision they made in dealing with all this and the scrutiny they do to distinguish between these different events, like for instance, the issues with trying to convince Vice President Pence not to go forward and validate the election.
Yeah.
They said, well, that's not part of his formal duty, so he didn't do anything wrong there because that doesn't really interfere with that, and he did it anyway. So I'm thinking, okay. But for the most part, I don't think the general public is aware of how unique this decision is. There's some incredible dissents, and obviously the three judges, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Roberts, they basically said that this is not Roberts, but Jackson, forgive me. They said, well, we think that this makes the president a king. I don't really agree with that. And I don't disagree with the dissents. I'm really disappointed with the overarching concept of this opinion. But, not all the questions are answered. What's the difference between an official and an unofficial act?
Yeah.
And they stretch it out a little bit. An unofficial act, even if it promotes his authority and his responsibilities as president, that's protected too. So he has absolute immunity for anything official, and anything unofficial is presumptively immune, which is you and I know. That means that's when we go to court. We have to bear that presumption or fight that presumption with the evidence that we have.
Yeah. And so when you think about it, so I remember when we were in law school, one of the very first cases we ever learned about immunity is the Paula Jones case with Clinton.
Right.
So that talks about this immunity, that a president who's sitting in office cannot be civilly sued for something they had done before they get into office. And I remember that the reasoning behind that was, because I remember thinking like, well, that's crazy. So that means that you can just do whatever you want before you're about to go into office. And then you're going to be sitting there as president, nobody can come for you. But I remember that the reasoning behind that, when we learned about it, was because they didn't want anything to interfere with the duties of a president. That was a big, huge concept, that we should be looking at it from a constitutional perspective, that this person has been determined to be our president, and our president should be focused on things like how we're going to improve the country, how we're going to deal with war, how we're going to deal with these things. And if he also has to be dealing with all the lawsuits that come out of the woodwork, which could end up being some of them legitimate and some of them not because you're the president, is he really going to sit in depositions all day and all of those stuff? So I remember understanding the why, going, okay, I get it. It's not saying that he can never be sued for those civil things. It meant during his presidency he can't, but the minute he's no longer president, ding, 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 all that becomes live, and now then you can be sued for those things. So it made sense. And in this instance, the question was, so they were trying to find him criminally responsible for those things that he was doing while he was president. I guess some of the things trailed into until after, when he actually, Biden takes over and he's still kind of involved with some of the stuff, obviously still was fighting the legitimacy of the presidency, but he does obviously willingly leaves. And so they're saying that the question for the Supreme Court was, is he immune? Does he have immunity criminally wise for all of those things that he's doing since he's technically sitting in office? He's a president.
Right.
And so now it's like legal fight is, what does it mean to be official duty? So if he's doing an official duty, he's got immunity to some degree, depending on what he's doing. And it's like, do we know? And I think when we're reading the opinion, they do that exact same kind of analysis. They're saying that the court's dominant concern was to avoid division of the president's attention.
That's it.
During the decision-making process caused by needless worry as to the possibility of damages, actions stemming from any particular official decision.
Right.
And they took that straight from Clinton and Paula Jones.
You bet.
That same concept, that he should not have to think about while he's sitting there. I think it's more ripe for in these situations of, am I going to be held criminally responsible for this? And I think it's going to be interesting to say, because I think that you're right. I think as a president, he's sitting there. If he believed that, if he has any information to where he thinks that the results are not valid, question them. We're doing all kinds of crazy stuff right now. I mean, if anything else should maybe be questioned sometimes, it should be the legitimacy of the actual election. What I thought was crazy was people who jumped on that bandwagon who was just like, how dare he question the results of the election? They're 100% valid. Not a single person in this country can say that there is not not that every single election was 100% valid. There's no way. We know for a fact people who are dead,
Right.
we have their ballots, right? We
Yes.
know for a fact ballots get thrown in the trash can.
Yeah.
Human error, maybe intentional or not intentional. So that means to some degree there is an error of unreliability of an election results. The question is to what degree? If it rises to the degree that it could have affected the actual ultimate results, then that's a problem. Although we know we have a margin of error, we know that. So that's why I thought it was so crazy that's when I kind of started thinking, I think we may be grabbing for straws. I think we're pulling for straws to see anything that we can do because it should be questioned. If there is at least some information to where we're saying that we think it's questionable, does it mean 100% the election was stolen and all those other stuff? Maybe not. If the investigation comes back.
Does he have a First Amendment right to just bring it up as an issue, especially in speaking to the public on January 6th? I think he does. I mean, I may not agree with him, but I don't think that there's enough certainty to basically deprive him of his First Amendment right to raise it as an issue.
Yeah,
You know,
it's true.
Did he foment violence? Was he trying to inspire people to go and commit violent acts? I don't know. You know, he gets close. I mean, but it's definitely nothing direct.
Yeah, it's not
and
direct.
I think that the interesting aspect of this is now it goes back down to the circuit court to decide what's official, what's unofficial.
Yeah.
Once they make their decision, it's going to go back to the Supreme Court. Then they're going to send it back again. I mean, this is going to bounce around for the next few years. And I think at the end of the day that the ultimate result will be this guy's in such an important position. We don't want him distracted, which was the point you made so well, that, we're going to let him get away with a few things here and there, that we'll just overlook it.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know that that's the right decision, but I have a feeling that's where we're going to end up because, I mean, he's packed the Supreme Court where everything he wanted, Roe versus Wade, all the other decisions that have come out from there. I mean, this court is the most conservative court that we've had probably in the history of the Supreme Court, and he's the guy that created them. And they are not going to forget how they got their job. So to the extent that they can, and I'm not going to say that they're just going to ignore the law, but to the extent that they can interpret it any way in favor of him, we're looking down the road at a lot of that.
And to think that those pieces came into play, and I think people who understand the legality of it, as the opportunity came up while he was president and it only comes up, it's really kind of by divine intervention of the fact that he was in a position where he was able to appoint Supreme Court justices and then be able to, weigh in his favor at that point in time. I think who would have known that those little chess pieces that were then were going to become so instrumental years later. You know what I mean? Like he couldn't have thought he would lose that one and then come back around for another try to
I think his goals are much more
at.
limited to Roe versus Wade and that, their conservative characteristics have been a great aid to him in all these other challenges that arose after that.
Yeah. And I think that you're right about just the fact, going to the First Amendment, I think what's interesting is that to some degree, there was such an attempt to silence this man. And even this whole entire concept of these charges being brought in a way of can a president make statements like this?
Right.
And why shouldn't they be able to? Do you know what I mean? It's like, what about the times that we've went to war? And guess what? A president stood up and said, we're against this country, and then that riled everybody up and we go to war against that country. So it's like, so you mean it's okay for them to do it if it's being backed by the right people?
Right.
If what he's saying is what everybody behind him wants him to say, then it's okay.
Yes.
But if they don't like it, if they don't like it, then it's not okay. And that becomes really scary. And I think so interesting. And when I go back to when I first remembered him running, I remembered thinking the fear they have is he's not afraid to say anything.
Right.
There is no fear in that man to say anything. And I think that that's what scared him the most. Right. When everybody else is a part of the good old boy network, right? When you've spent your entire life in politics, you know what to say, when to say, and how to say it.
Yes.
And he doesn't. And nor does he care. I mean, that is what he was known for. And I think this, unfortunately, why it kind of gave me a lot of goosebumps for him was, and I always go back to thinking about you because you're such an advocate for First Amendment rights. That's what we were looking so much on, is that, and he didn't mean to stand up to be the advocate of First Amendment rights. That wasn't Trump's goal. I mean, it wasn't like, I'm going to make a statement for myself on First Amendment rights. It wasn't. But then when they started attacking him in a way that I really kind of thought, listen, you really are trying to manipulate and now punish him for the words he said because you didn't want them said. I mean, it does become very, very the question of who is really the biggest side or people that are calling into question our democracy, because that's really the core of it, calling into question our constitutions.
Right.
So this answer from the Supreme Court comes back and they say, okay, we are going to give him criminal immunity. So which means different is that the immunity we were talking about with Clinton and Paula Jones, where in that case she was I think an assistant, she was a temp or an intern working for him while he was in the process of being, I think, governor or something.
Some governmental position.
Yeah. So she says that he inappropriately sexually assaulted her, and so they're saying that during the presidency he can't be charged civilly because she goes to sue him after he becomes president, and so they just put a pause on it. This case is now saying that let's look at criminal actions while he's president and say he's immune forever.
Right.
Means it's not like we're putting them on hold, which we do know right now currently. If Trump goes into office in November, there are cases of which the question will come to, can he pardon himself on the criminal charges that he's already been convicted of?
Right.
The ones with Stormy Daniels. But a lot of the other cases get stalled and they get stopped, and they will then potentially resume themselves after he's out of office, which is crazy to think he's going to be fighting these things potentially forever. Unless when he's in office he can figure out what all can he pardon himself with or influence. But this is really saying what you're doing while you're in office. If we consider that they are core presidential, executive branch duties that you have to do, if you do them while you're in office, you can never be criminally charged with those things. But if they're unofficial duties, then you can't be, which is like you're saying. So that means
the presumption.
Yeah, that creates a presumption. So that means the question will be now to determine every single one of those acts that they tried to come at him criminally for, do they fall under this immunity? Because now the Supreme Court says that we do believe that there is an immunity that has a certain trigger. Does this act trigger it? Is interesting. I couldn't believe they go all the way down. Think of the resources. That's what I think about. How many people are working on all this? On all of them.
Got to be hundreds. I mean, when you think of the staff of the Supreme Court alone, you got 119 pages of 6-point Times New Roman type. I mean, that's a lot to read. I mean, there's a lot of information in here that just boggles the mind. I remember back in the day, most of the Supreme Court opinions were 20, 25 pages. If you got one that was 30, it was long. Now they're hundreds of pages.
Hundreds of pages.
And everybody gets their point out. Let me throw this out there. So we're there on January 6th, and we're saying, I want you to let everybody down there at the Capitol know how you feel and tell them that you agree with me that this election was stolen. I don't know that is definitely telling people to go down and commit the criminal acts that they committed. Here's the other side of that, though. Hey, supervisor of elections in Georgia, you need to find 23,000 more votes for me.
Yeah.
Okay? I need to win your state. You need to make sure you come up with 23,000 more votes. From my perspective, clearly a violation of election laws. But absolute immunity probably boxes that out. Even though it's clearly a violation of the law, clearly self-driven, all for his own benefit, but he's got absolute immunity now because what's he doing? He's trying to make himself president. I don't know where that's going to go. That one's going to be fascinating.
But they definitely, I'm sure they're going to fight to say wouldn't it be just considered an unofficial act? If you're making a phone call saying that you want them to find votes, I wouldn't say it's official.
It's going to be the tough call.
Yeah. I think what they'll narrow it down to is official means in your capacity to advance your role as president of the United States, which I could say that kind of does.
But I mean, does it benefit someone other than yourself?
Yeah, maybe
that might be a useful criteria.
That's not and what's crazy is you saw in here, one of the things that they were saying was that when they go back, because this question has never been asked before, so that was a huge thing. This is another monumental first appearance kind of issue to the Supreme Court of them having to answer this question in a way that they never really thought they were going to have to answer. So when it goes back and they're kind of trying to figure that out of what's official and what's not official, this opinion says his intent shouldn't be considered.
Right.
So when we're figuring if it's if it's official or not,
Right.
it should be factually based. That's not based on what the intention is. It should be
Right.
what was the actual act that was done, and is that official or not, regardless of what the intention of the act was, which will also be huge because normally your
Intent is
intentional
it,
is
yeah.
everything when it comes to criminal, right?
Especially when it comes to criminal law.
Mens rea, we talked about that. The mens rea is usually what we're looking at, is what the intent is. So this was a big win for Trump in a lot of ways. I mean, is he going to get rid of all his problems? No. But is it huge? And the thing that I think that breaks my heart is that I always want, and I think you taught me so much about that, equality, right? Equality. Like, you can be on either side, but it should always be fair, right? And
Right.
that's the job of what we're always fighting for as attorneys, is that we're fighting for where that equality lies, you know?
Right.
And I really have seen that so much from you, of how you advocate for people. I mean, we'll talk about it one day with Luke, but I spent a lot of my years working with Luke advocating for adult gentlemen clubs, you know, something I would have never thought that I would have been representing. And he made me see it from a perspective that nobody else would have seen from. I mean, you could beautifully articulate why a girl should be allowed to dance naked and on a man's lap, and why she should be able to do that.
Well, basically, the exposure of anatomical areas is a manifestation of the ability to communicate the message of eroticism that should be free for all human beings to either convey and communicate or receive. So, protected by the First Amendment. Now, it's taken a beating lately. I mean, they've chipped away at that substantially over the last several years, but it's still there. Clubs are still there. But, you know, as much of the work that you did, and we're so proud of you, and you've done such a wonderful job, and I'm glad that you remembered a few things that we taught you along the way. But nothing would make me happier than when we'd have a big case. Let's say that we dealt with one of Joe Redner's clubs, and we go all the way to the 11th Circuit, we go all the way to the Supreme Court, and it comes back at nude dancing's protected by the First Amendment. It is what it is. But then 2 months later, 4 months later, we see that same case cited for a much broader, totally unrelated First Amendment principle. That was the source of pride, because it's the concept, not really the conduct, but it's the concept that demands the protection. I think that was really what gave us the most pride. And to this day, we still cite a lot of those cases.
Yeah.
You know, it's not what it used to be. I know that the courts have chipped away at that. I know that lots of legislation in Florida chipping away at what I think are people's fundamental rights. It seems to be, you know, fast and furious down here. Luckily, the federal courts have stood up. We have a challenge right now against the desire to eliminate the ability to perform at an adult entertainment business for anybody under the age of 21. So the people between 18 and 21. And my favorite argument for that is, in the adult bookstore, Sally, she's a cashier. She can't work there anymore, but she can go in there and shop all she wants. But she can't be the cashier to check herself out. I mean, a lot of this just makes absolutely no sense. So we're challenging that. We'll see where that gets us. But we've had success in challenging our local governor's efforts to do what he likes to do.
And it's so important. That work that you're doing is so imperative, because people really, I think people forgot we had constitutional rights until very recently. They're seeing these cases and they're going, okay, yeah, you're right. We have these rights that need to be protected. I think the Roe v. Wade is huge, where people are really going, oh my gosh, like they're being kind of awakened to that. But I think looking at this case from this immunity, is that the only disappointment I felt so much about it was that I could understand all of this taking place if we were talking about Hitler. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's what I think. I think with the level of this, to me, is like that the act he did as president was to commit genocide. Do you know what I mean? I feel like that would have justified this type of behavior of going, listen, we got to figure out how that man doesn't run again, and we got to figure out how to criminally charge him for the things he said as president. If he was saying things like, we need to lock up all Jews, and we need to do this thing, you know, it's like, that's where I absolutely can see it. So it is just so disappointing that I think it gets to this level sometimes, because people, a vendetta. There is something crazy against the way that Trump was. And I remember when he was first running, and I said to my husband, I said, I wish he would just bring it down a couple levels. That's what I remember. I think years ago we talked about
Right.
this. I was like, I just wish he's here, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, do you gotta call them names? Because here's the thing.
Right.
What we know is it dilutes your message
Right.
when you start personally attacking him. But
And
my
everyone has a bad nickname.
Yes, yeah. And my thing was what I had learned about criminal law and police officers
Right.
were if you want them to do everything and anything they can do against you, charge you with every single crime that they can find, that they can even find a way to fit into a crime, call them a name.
Right.
Call them a name, and the charges against you will be madness.
Right.
And that's what I used to think about Trump at the very beginning was that I just wished come down a couple of notches because you're going to create such hate to where, and that's why I don't know why I always related it back to officers. Although I'm like, just chill out when you're in the presence of an officer. Chill out.
Right.
What you don't want is the hate, because one of the things you first taught me when we first started doing this was when we would do traffic tickets, and he taught me it was crazy. When you do a traffic ticket, what you do when you first would go in there in our courts is you go and try to find the officer who pulled over your client, and then
Yeah.
you talk with them, and you're trying to get an agreement between you and this officer of what the resolution in that case can be. And every time our clients were nasty to the officer during the arrest,
Yep.
they would, one, make sure they showed up for the hearing, right?
Yes.
And then two, they would literally have all their notes and go, let me tell you what your client said to me.
Right.
He called me da-da-da-da,
Yeah.
and then called me that. I'm not agreeing to any resolution other short than jail time, da-da-da-da-da. But if our client was nice and respectful,
Right.
the officer would always be like, oh,
Human
sure.
nature. Yeah.
Sure, right? It's human nature. And I remembered as it was all coming back with Nancy Pelosi and all of that stuff, all I kept on thinking was, I'm telling you, it's discretion, and it has a lot to do with the things this man has said about these people.
Right.
I do believe it really comes out, and it should never be like that. Shouldn't
Right.
be at all. We should be a government that goes, regardless of what I'm being called, I'm going to make sure I'm doing what's right for this country, and I'm following the law, and I'm doing those things. When I think unfortunately, he created such a disdain for and with some people to him to where they were willing to do anything to get
Right.
back at this man.
I think that's a lot of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and it's so sad because like I agree with you is that Trump, I think there's no doubt at this point in time that Trump is going to be president, but I will say that when he just did the debate with Biden, I honestly believed we were looking at a more humbled man.
He had taken it down.
Right? I thought it was insane
Right.
because I did know that I felt like Trump was going to change the face of elections forever, because once somebody starts something, it means other people feel like they need to rise to that occasion, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's right or wrong, people start doing that. So all of a sudden you started seeing other people calling people names.
Right.
And so at that debate with Biden was so prepared and ready that I was like, I was talking to you, Biden was the one who seemed to be the more of the aggressor.
Exactly.
There were
Right.
times when he was like, when they were fighting about golf and Trump goes, listen, we're being childish. Has anyone ever heard Trump say that? We're being childish?
Dude, Biden was just so ill prepared.
I know. And Biden goes, you're a child. I'm like, what's up?
Yeah.
You
Calling
need to
him
carry the
names.
golf bag.
Calling him names, right.
No, yeah, I think that.
Combative.
So I
Trump
think
was
we've
like,
seen
"Hold on, I can't
definitely a
understand you
difference.
little bit."
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was almost magnanimous for
Yeah.
a moment.
Yeah, no, it was. I think he's been humbled in a way that, just like you're saying, I hope that he goes. I mean, I get what you're saying. I hope it doesn't spend the next 4 years figuring out how he's going to get revenge,
Get payback.
but as an attorney, and my perspective about it, when I feel somebody is being treated unfairly, and some of the things I do believe, and in essence, from an attorney's perspective, like we talked about the 36 counts, and as an attorney who does criminal law, it could have been one, right? It could have all been consumed into
Significantly,
literally,
yeah.
1, 5, you know what I mean? It didn't need to be
Right.
37 and 38 of when you wrote the check, that's one thing. When
Yeah.
you put it in the ledger, that's another count of fraud. I mean, I think everything has been to the highest degree of things you would never charge any other president with, any other person in office with. The inflation of his property values. You sue on behalf of a bank who says, guys, we don't have any problem with
Right.
Trump.
We
Please.
got paid back
We
100%.
got to pay back every $1. And you sue on behalf of the state and say that he overvalued them. Of
Right.
every single person whose house is up for sale right now
Right.
could be in trouble for the same thing, right?
More or
Because
less.
almost all of them, besides
Yeah.
just recently, all houses that are up for sale, they usually all get appraised underneath that, right? They're all
Right.
appraised way underneath that
yeah.
value, and they usually sell underneath that value.
Right.
And so at that point, and so it's just like, I think there's an element of it to where it it became very much to where it's obvious that there's an attack on him. So to some degree, I'm like, yes, I hope it doesn't spend 4 years. But to the other degree, the other point of it is, I hope that if there is a way to hold people accountable who may have violated their obligation, then we do that too. But as we know, as attorneys, it's discretion, right? State attorney gets to decide what they want to charge with and what they don't. And if it meets the elements, and if we made the standard so low in some of those elements, then it just was more of a focus on him, I think, because of the target that he put on himself.
Before we close out, the one thing that I'm concerned with is this change to the whole way things operate with his Focus 25, whatever it's called, and it just, the 2025 options that he's considering.
He's distanced himself, though, from
I hope he has.
Press.
I mean,
verbally said.
I'm not completely terrified because of the separation of powers. I think we've got enough there to protect us in the big scheme of things. Obviously, the Supreme Court is on his side, but in reading this lengthy opinion, they come up with some pretty legitimate explanations for the rulings that they've come up with. I don't agree with a lot of them, but they put some backing to their decision-making process. I just hope we don't get to the point where we don't have that same benefit of the separation of powers to keep us protected the way the founding fathers wanted it to be.
I think that became a huge issue of what they were looking at as that separation of powers issue.
That's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds, but we're definitely going to see it.
We are absolutely going to see it. I mean, the last time we talked about Trump, I was pretty sure that they would find a way to sentence him to jail time, and that he would be the first president who would run from a jail cell, and then the minute that he was found president, he was going to be able to pardon himself and say, "Open the door," just like a king.
Here we go.
Like, that's really what I thought it was. So at this point, we're going to keep everybody informed. I'm so thankful that you came here, Luke. I mean, we couldn't have done this episode without you. So I just want to remind people, please, during this time, love your neighbors, respect everybody's opinion, and don't become so polarized. Don't let the news polarize you so much. We're going to be okay as a nation, because no matter what, we as the people are very powerful together. We have a lot of power to do things. I don't think we should fear that one man in the office is going to be the downfall of an entire empire. I don't think that's it at all. I think that we're strong enough to be able to band together in the best interest of what this nation needs. So I want people not to get so lost in Biden versus Trump and the fact that whoever, you want to hate each other, don't speak to each other. People are getting fired from their jobs. It's just like, because there is real lives on the line. And I think I think we've seen a lot of people who are getting into trouble for the things that they've said about Trump, about, well, I wish he hadn't missed. And it's like, come on, guys, let's not get to a point where we're talking about that he needs to be murdered at this point in time. So our heart goes out to everybody that has been affected by the shooting. And like I said, please spread love and light and positivity at this time, because we're about to probably go into a potentially dark time because people are taking this very, very personal. But we're thankful for the fact that there's not been as many fatalities after that event, and now we'll just sit back and see what takes place. So tune in next time for Legal Candy, and I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to have Mr. Lirot on.
Thank you for the privilege.
And give them your information so if they want to call you, ask you any questions, comments, concerns.
My office number is 727-536-2100. My email is luke2@lirotlaw.com. That's LUKE, the number 2, at LIROTLAW.com. And happy to answer any questions that we may have inspired. And again, I can't be more grateful to you, more proud of you. I love you. You've done wonderfully. You're just great.
Only because of you. So there's years I used to say that exact address, similar email address and phone number, but now that I've got my own firm, so if you need anything from us, Colucci Law Group, 733-933-9438, and email is office@Colucci, COLUCCI lawgroup.com. Thank you guys.